This Easter project consists of two bunnies plus a basket with another bunny and two eggs in it that says Happy Easter. I'll show you how to make this step by step, giving you some cutting, gluing, and clamping tips along the way. This Easter Bunnies pattern is today's project. It will take several pieces to make this, and I'll be cutting them all out of 3/4 inch red oak. I printed out all the patterns and cut them out, then decided on the most efficient way to lay these out on the stock I had on hand. I had some oak that was 8 inches wide and cut a piece of that long enough to cut the basket and two largest bunny legs from it. I like to save wider stock for when it's needed, so I laid out the remaining parts on a piece 5 3/4 wide and 39 inches long. I'll start cutting with one of the bunny bodies. Bunny bodies? Sounds like something Hugh Hefner might have said once. Anyway, you'll notice a couple of the features of the Pega scroll saw here. The arm holds in the upper position while you thread the blade through the pilot hole, then is easily pushed back into place. Then all you have to do is use the thumb screw on the blade chuck to tighten the blade in the blade holder, and you're ready to start cutting. My supplier provides 4/4 hardwoods at 13/16 thick, so if the board's still a little rough, I'll run it through the thickness planer and take 1/32 off the top and bottom, leaving me with a final thickness of the 3/4 inch called for in the plans. In my experience, the best blade for this will be a number 9 Pegasus modified geometry blade, and that is what I have in the saw. I'll leave a link to my videos on choosing blade types and sizes in case you haven't already seen them. Cutting the bunny is about as easy as it gets, so even a beginner should have no problems with this part of the project. Just follow the line and let the blade do the work. Cutting thick material like this can be a little slow, so just be patient. If you try to speed things up by putting extra pressure on the blade, you'll likely just cause the blade to flex and end up with an uneven cut, or overheating the blade and causing the blade to burn, or a broken blade. Scroll sawing requires a certain amount of patience. There was nothing different to show on cutting the second bunny, so I moved on to the basket. This is going to be challenging to anyone with a lot of scroll sawing experience because of the number of inside cuts needed to make the three parts of the basket. I started with the middle piece. To make the first sharp turn, I cut from the pilot hole into the corner. Then I moved the blade back to the pilot hole, pivoted the workpiece, and backed the blade to that corner. It was then just a fairly short move of the workpiece to follow the cutting line rather than the very sharp turn that would have otherwise been required. The next turn is 90 degrees, and scroll sawing requires learning how to make these well. The best way is to saw to the intersection, back up the blade very slightly so it's not cutting, pivoting the workpiece 90 degrees, then starting cutting again. If you haven't done this before, you might want to practice on some scrap wood until you start to get the hang of it. I made the rest of the inside cuts for the middle part of the basket. Then it was time to make the outside cut. This is just a matter of starting at the bottom of one side, then following the line all the way around until you reach the bottom at the other side. With all the parts cut, it's time to start some assembly. The part numbers were labeled on the photo of the finished project, and I left the patterns on the pieces until I got to this stage to keep from getting any parts confused. Sometimes I just break the corners of pieces with sandpaper by hand, but I thought these bunnies needed a little more rounding than that. Besides, I bought a new router not too long ago, and I want to start using it more often. I'll leave a link to my review of the router in case you are interested in watching that. I decided to do a roundover on the head of the bunny, which is on the piece that will be sandwiched in between the legs. I'm still getting used to this trim router, holding it steady and keeping the base flat to the piece I'm working on. It takes a little bit of skill to do that on small workpieces like this. The two sides for this bunny are fairly large, and after a close look at the parts, I determined the best way to proceed was to glue on the two sides, then do the roundovers on the sides after the glue's dried. I applied some white glue to the parts, then used a brush to spread it evenly. I set the parts aside for a few minutes to let the glue start to set up a little before applying the clamps. If I apply F-clamps immediately, the parts tend to want to move while I'm turning the clamps, tightening them. While the glue was setting up a little, I started to glue up on the basket. Since there are so many openings on the sides of the basket, I switched to a glue bottle with a smaller tip to apply glue to these pieces. I don't want glue on the bottom part of the basket that will be showing through these holes because that will keep the polyurethane finish from sticking. I'll set this aside for a few minutes as well before applying the clamps. I'm ready to start applying clamping pressure now. This is one of those times when most woodworkers agree you can never have too many clamps. You should get some squeeze out when you tighten the clamps. This is an indication that you covered the entire surface with glue. If you don't get any squeeze out, it's likely that the joint is glue starved and won't hold together properly. I use a rag to remove any excess, and after removing the clamps, I'll do a little sanding to make sure there wasn't any glue missed. If you don't do this, when you go to apply finish, you'll have spaces that won't accept the finish. After a couple coats of spray polyurethane on each of the pieces, this is what the completed items look like. My favorite is the basket in the middle. I think I'll make one or two more of these. I'd love to read and will respond to any comments on this project. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to watch the next one recommended to you on the screen. I'll see you there.